Hi, this is Jeff Zeig, and here I am in the offices of the Milton Erickson Foundation in Phoenix, Arizona, with another 5-minute tip for therapists. The topic of this tip is indirect technique. Now, I'm going to argue with myself for a moment. I'm going to say Milton Erickson, who was known for being indirect, really wasn't indirect. Being indirect is a technique. What Milton Erickson was doing was communicating concepts. As a conceptual communicator, Milton Erickson was in a therapist state. That therapist state was orienting toward. Orienting toward is a method that is used when you want to help somebody to change their state, to change their perspective, to change their mood, to change their emotion, even to change their identity. Think for a moment about a joke. You can't use informative communication to get somebody to laugh. The joke that you tell, with all of the flourishes and all of the different rises and falls of tension, leads to a moment of humor. The joke is the induction for the humor. You can't use informative communication and say, 1, 2, 3, 4, laugh, and I want you to laugh at this moment, a kind of direct suggestion. You need to orient toward humor so that there's a aha moment, and the humor just happens in the recipient of the communication. Well, hypnosis is often a technique where it seems that the person who is inducing the hypnosis is really active. That person is doing a lot of different things to elicit a hypnotic state in the other person, but the important thing is using communication that awakens, that activates, that helps that other person to come alive to the concept that is being communicated. Now, let's think of some ways in which orienting toward can be affected in communication, and then we can have other 5-minute tips for therapists that develop those ways of orienting toward. One 5-minute tip that already exists is about metaphor. Metaphor and simile are ways of communicating that activate conceptual realizations. A second way of using orienting toward is signification. Metaphor is a verbal technique. Metaphor is one of the forms of language that we use where one thing represents something else that it's not related to. If you say to a person, you're a lion, they're not really a lion. You're creating a metaphor. They have to activate to understand the meaning of that, the personal meaning that that has. Signification is something different. Signification could be a sound or a gesture. I'm signifying something, and you have to understand, activate, to interpret. A third possibility for using orienting towards is ambiguity. When there's something that's ambiguous, the recipient of the communication has to activate in order to realize the meaning of that ambiguity. Another way of orienting toward is to use psychological level communication, and the last way that I'll talk about in this series is using hypnotic language. Now, Erickson was famous for using presuppositional structures. For example, I don't know when you can enjoy experiencing the comfort of trance. If you answer now or later, you're still presupposing that somebody will enjoy the comfort of trance. You use these forms of indirection, these techniques of hypnotic language, when you want another person to realize a concept. So what we're going to do in the next of these series is to go through each of those components, and with each of those components talk about developing that idea so that the end point of this is that a therapist begins to actualize a state, a therapist state of orienting toward. This is not a matter of using a technique. The idea that I've been promoting is that the state that the therapist occupies is the progenitor of the technique. If the therapist can teach himself to occupy the state of orienting toward, the techniques that I've talked about will be secondary. They'll be birthed because the therapist accesses that state. So this is Jeff Zeig, Phoenix, Arizona, at the offices of the Milton Erickson Foundation with another 5-minute tip for therapists. Thank you.